So I just needed to unmute. Again, thank you so much, Nomi. For those who don't know me, I'm Ellen Vollinger, Legal Director at Food Research and Action Center, and we are so pleased that you joined us this afternoon, but especially pleased to host this third in a series of webinars to hear the results of ongoing surveys of SNAP customers that use the Fresh EBT app about how COVID-19 is affecting their access to SNAP, to food benefits in general, and to other basic resources. These survey findings complement other sources of information that can help policymakers understand some of the hardship that are going on in the country. For those who haven't seen it, the Urban Institute yesterday released the third in its wave of surveys during COVID. And of course, every week, the Census Bureau is continuing to release findings from its pulse surveys. I'm happy to turn the program over now to Stacy Taylor. Stacy leads policy and partnerships at Propel, and she's been gracious enough to share the findings and to join us for the webinar series. So Stacy, thank you so much for doing this.
Great. Thank you, Ellen. It's wonderful to join you all again today. This is the third in this webinar series, and we were just chatting about the schedule for the next one. So encourage again the conversation in the Q&A, ideas for questions we should be exploring in the future, and other feedback and input as we continue this conversation together. The data we'll share today is from our October survey. I do want to do a quick refresh. We can go to the next slide, and who we are. There was some questions after the last webinar. In the very first webinar, I did a slightly longer intro, so feel free to look back at that or at the slides. But just so you know where we're getting the information and how we're connecting to SNAP households, the name of our social enterprise technology company is Propel, and Propel exists to build modern, respectful, effective technology that helps low-income Americans improve their financial health. And the primary way we do that is through our tool, Fresh EBT. And Fresh EBT is the tool you see here on the screen. It's a free app that can be downloaded onto any smartphone and used to check and manage any benefits dispersed through an EBT card, and also to connect with relevant tools and resources for households using Fresh EBT. And on the next slide, that is how we distribute this survey and collect this information. So about 4 million households across the country are using Fresh EBT on a regular basis. When they open up Fresh EBT to look at information and resources, a randomly selected group of folks will be invited to take a survey. This last month, we surveyed about 2,500 families. Households anywhere an EBT card works are using Fresh EBT, so we have survey results from all 50 states. Again, random selection. The survey was distributed the first 2 weeks of October, so these results are from that survey, though I will try to share and compare to previous surveys as well. And by default, because it's distributed through Fresh EBT, all results come from current EBT customers, current SNAP participants. And the next slide. So our results for October, these are our high sort of takeaways. And again, we will share these slides after this presentation. So know that you will be receiving them. Also, feel free to email me at any point if you haven't received them or want another copy. And we also are trying to put this up on our website. But we look at employment, at receipt of benefits this month, highlighting the economic impact payment, at housing security or insecurity, at the election. We can't have a conversation this week without talking about the election, I think, and about PEBT and challenges for families with school-age children. The next slide, we dig into employment a bit. So we are seeing, as reflected in many other studies, as Ellen mentioned, that folks are reporting high levels of unemployment and underemployment. Respondents who had been working prior to the pandemic continue to report high rates of underemployment as well as unemployment. Over half of the Fresh EBT users who had worked in 2020 said they had worked in 2020, and less than a third are working right now. Of those who reported working prior to the pandemic, 30% report that they're not working now but looking for work. Pretty consistently across all of the surveys we've distributed on a monthly basis since the beginning of the pandemic, about 60% of respondents who had been working prior to the pandemic are saying they're working less and want to be working more. And of those who are working, a third report making less than $549 a month. Through different survey questions, some similar findings. About 30% of Fresh EBT customers report having lost a job due to COVID. And this is from October. This can be compared to the peak. The highest rate we saw was in May, and it was around 60% had reported losing, who had been working reported losing employment. But only 6% have reported starting a new job since March. The next slide dives into economic impact payments a bit. We know a lot of attention is turned towards the receipt of the economic impact payment. That deadline has been extended to November 21st. We continue to message that through Fresh EBT to provide folks tools, resources, and support to file the right information, whether it's taxes or the non-filer form, to get to receive that economic impact payment if folks are eligible but haven't received it yet. But we're still seeing 20% of survey respondents say they have not yet received their economic impact payment, and only 8% of those report that they're ineligible, so they haven't received it because they're ineligible. So sharing this information with you all, because I know many folks on this call are working on this issue. Also would love your ideas if you have other ideas for how we can be sharing information or connecting folks to resources. We currently connect folks to the United Way Worldwide hotline for support, as well as the non-filer form and materials shared through CFPB and CBPP campaigns. But as we asked folks, we heard that about 30% who haven't yet received their economic impact payment don't know why. About 8% report having submitted the non-filer form or taxes but have yet to receive their economic impact payment. So it's unclear if they should just wait or if there's other action that needs to be taken. About 12% report that they were claimed on someone else's taxes with or without their knowledge, so they haven't received it because someone else did. And about 2% report that the payment went to the wrong bank account. We've also asked folks who have already received their economic impact payment how they've used it, and continue to see similar trends as we've reported in from past surveys. The vast majority of folks putting the money towards bills, rent, et cetera, as well as household items and hygiene supplies, food, and to pay down debt. Next slide, please. We've talked about housing security, and we continue to hear from folks about fear of eviction. We have not seen reported eviction rates going up, but we have seen that more people reported having moved permanently in the last 30 days compared to the 30 days prior, and the anxiety and questions around eviction remain. We partnered with the Kentucky Equal Justice Center to highlight a tool that they created that's available nationwide, not just in Kentucky, but this tool available in every state helps renters to generate declarations to give to their landlord to get protection from eviction. This is the paperwork required under the CDC's eviction order, as well as connect folks to legal aid resources. And since the end of September, we've seen over 2,500 households use that tool to generate a declaration. So as much as that helps us understand the degree to which folks are facing imminent eviction, that's the engagement we've seen with this tool thus far. On the next slide, Election Day, 6 days out, and we've asked households using Fresh EBT through this survey if folks plan to vote, if they have questions about voting. And we asked folks, do you have any questions about voting, and saw sort of a litany of nope, got it, no questions. We did hear from folks that about 20% of Fresh EBT households haven't yet decided when taking this survey in early October whether or not they plan to vote in the November election. And 67% reported they do plan to vote and have a plan in place. Through a partnership with vote.org, we put out information about voting resources, and have seen pretty high engagement with that tool. And as much as it's helpful to see how folks are engaging in it, to get a sense of what types of information we're looking for, over 230,000 used the tool to verify a registration, over 67,000 to complete a registration. The number completing a registration was up in sort of September and has declined as more folks have engaged with checking a polling place, requesting an absentee ballot, checking on voting rights, et cetera. Next slide, please. And then similar to past surveys or webinars, we continue to see responses from households that government support has been helpful. So we see from Judy in Oregon, I've gone on Medicaid, received the stimulus payment and the extra SNAP benefits, and was able to pay off a large amount to PGE. This has given me a little breathing room. We hear this phrase a lot, a little breathing room. And then when we ask households what future government policy should do, again, we see requests for or suggestions for help with rent, utilities, food, and we saw transportation tick up just a bit this last month compared to past months. The next slide, please. But also more support is needed, especially to cover everyday expenses. So over 50% of respondents reported that they think the money they have in cash right now will last 2 days most at max. And over 50% also reported running low or not having most things that their household needs, like food and cleaning supplies. In the past, we asked folks, have you done any of the following in the past 30 days? Less than 20% reported none of these things. And you can see some of the stats here. 45% reported eating less, haven't paid a bill, skipped meals, visited a food pantry, relied on families for meals, skipping prescription medication. Next slide, please. We also asked households, are you spending money on food in addition to SNAP, WIC, or PEBT? So you can see here, roughly 20% have reported spending $50 to $100, another 30%, $100 to $200 additional a month, and upwards. And then we have been following PEBT and have seen that PEBT was authorized in some states or issued in some states in September, but not all states. And the continuing resolution will extend PEBT, but USDA has not put out guidance, and states have not been able to put together plans, and of course not issue payments to families. So families have not seen that money yet. So we looked at the data on the next slide here to see how families with school-aged children have been impacted in particular. And we saw that families with school-aged children, despite being more likely to be working than the overall survey population, are more likely to have borrowed money or used credit to cover expenses in the last 30 days. Families with children are more likely to have skipped paying a bill in the last 30 days, more likely to have less than 3 days of cash on hand, also more likely to have less than 1 or 2 days of cash on hand, more likely to report running low on or be out of everyday things like food, household products, and cleaning supplies, and more likely to report spending an additional $200 a month, and also more likely to have spent more than $300 additional a month on food on top of SNAP, WIC, or PEBT benefits. The next slide, please. Here I wanted to share some words directly from households using Fresh EBT. Everyone has indicated they would like their words to be shared, and I think these stories and words show the resilience, strength, and generosity of households using Fresh EBT and sharing through this survey. I think it also shows an invisible tax. As long as we fail to provide a coordinated government response, families are left to fend for themselves and their neighbors and their communities. So I'll read a few of these for you all. Jaws in Rhode Island has said, I have given money to friends and family and I don't want it back. They offer to pay it back and I tell them to pay it forward. Katrina in Maine wrote, I help whenever I can, whether it is helping someone with a little food or giving a ride or just lending an ear. Recently, my daughter was admitted, discharged today into the hospital, stayed 1 week. I've been having issues with the starter in my truck, so a friend loaned me her car for the whole week. My daughter was in the hospital. Mom in New Jersey wrote, well, I borrowed money from family and friends to afford my rent when I was not working due to the pandemic. I am in debt with many, and it's very stressful. Ashley in Alaska writes, I had a baby in August, and I've had to rely on friends and family for diapers and clothes, etc. My grandpa invites me over for dinner a lot because even with food stamps for my baby and me, it's hard to afford everything we need, especially need to support a healthy milk supply. And Angelina in California shared, at work, a lady brings us strawberries sometimes. When I left, there was a homeless man asking for help outside our store. I gave him the strawberries I had received. And Larry in North Carolina said, my sister-in-law passed away at 56 from COVID and did not have life insurance. I gave my brother all of my stimulus so he could pay the funeral home to bury her. The next slide, please. I just wanted to share that we have finally put these results up on our website. So if you go to this website here, you can see the results from September. If you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see a link to click to the results from September, and we'll also be sharing these results shared today on the website, hopefully in the not too distant future. So I wanted to share that website with you all. And then the last slide is just thank you again for joining today, for your questions, for your input, for your feedback. And please don't hesitate to be in touch. You can find my contact information on this slide, Stacy at joinpropel.com.
Stacy, thank you so much for that and for the information. And I appreciate Louise Hayes's question, which is just a comment that she so appreciates, says it's great, and thank you. The people who are dialed in on this call are people who, for the most part, are heavily involved in SNAP policy advocacy. And I'm just wondering if any of them want to put in the Q&A anything that they were surprised by, whether they're, and I'll ask you first, Stacy, if there were any areas on this latest survey where you felt you were surprised by something, or was it just that it was confirming for you the continued hardship that you'd seen in earlier surveys? But if anybody on the call either has a question, they could put that in. But if they even just want to react and let us know if they found any of the survey results to be particularly informative or surprising, that would be good to know. So, Stacy, is there a way to parse out at all whether you think this is more a continuation of what you found before, or whether you started to see some things identified that you were a little surprised about? I noticed there wasn't as much talk about unemployment insurance maybe in this set as in the earlier surveys.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think maybe surprising isn't exactly the right way to describe how I feel as I interpret some of this data, is sometimes affirming of expectations, but still startling how stark it is. In particular, when we started looking at how households with school-age children are impacted, I think going through that was kind of stunning. And the unemployment data has held pretty steady the last few months, but will be interesting to sort of keep an eye on that over the next few months as well. And I'll be sure to think about that for the next webinar. I appreciate you bringing that up. Oh,
that's great. And thank you to folks who are starting to chime in with what they found particularly insightful or surprising. And I just missed the one about housing. It's going off my screen from Lauren down in Atlanta. I'm looking at Gina Cornea from Utah, who's always taken aback at how grateful people are and how they do pay it forward despite the incredible hardship. It still surprises her with their optimism. And Angie Rogers out in Arizona with the Association of Food Banks says, given the survey, current SNAP recipients, do you ask about length of time on SNAP? we are finding so many new folks are coming to food banks, and of course, caseload is going up for SNAP. So do you find that, Stacy?
We don't ask about length of time, but we do ask if about being new to SNAP. So have you opened this case in the last 3 months? And we see that number ticking up very slightly. Now, of course, we don't capture the full SNAP population, but just the segment of folks who have opted into using Fresh EBT. But we do see some of those trends with the survey respondents as well.
Oh, that's great. And Rachel Cahill, who's out in Ohio, and who does a lot of work on SNAP, but also, like so many people on the call, recognize there are a lot of supports that people need, including cash, said that, quote, even though we know SNAP benefits are inadequate, really helpful to have more tangible evidence that families are still having to pay cash for food, despite emergency allotments still going out. So again, I think, there are probably different things about the findings, but they are tangible. These results are tangible. And I'm wondering whether or not you're surprised by the willingness of people to give you the comments and to allow them to be shared. Are you finding more willingness, or has that been pretty typical of the Fresh EBT customers, that you've surveyed over the years?
So I wouldn't say that there's anything that has changed recently, but I still am surprised at how generous people are with their time, with their comments, with the willingness to share.
And do you find like pretty good response rates when you go out, or does that vary survey to survey?
We do so we don't track response rates in the same way that maybe an academic survey or a typical survey would track response rates, because the way we distribute the survey is it sort of appears in Fresh EBT to a randomly select group of folks. And some people opt into it, but we don't always have an accurate track of how many people have seen it and not opted into it. But we just can count the response rate. So it's hard to compare to other survey results or to other times. But if we look at sort of the rate of response, it's stayed pretty high, even as we've distributed this same survey several months in a row. It's probably reaching different eyeballs, like different people each time, but nonetheless, the response rate has seems to have remained high.
And I'm wondering, Stacy, you seem to be able at Propel to continue for a while now as COVID persists. When you started this in March, did you think this was going to be like a month or two set of surveys? It's a while ago now.
It's hard to think back to what I was thinking in March about so many things. We did not start with the plan of having a regular survey over the course. We thought we would be doing this once or twice. So glad that we're able to now track some of the trends, and we're figuring out how to continue it and getting better at it, I hope, and better at sharing results thanks to you all and to this partnership.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I did get finally back to Lauren Waite's comment. I found it in my box. I'm still learning how to navigate this. She said she's down in Atlanta with the food bank. The housing info was especially interesting today. Or I guess I'm wrong, here in California. So sorry about that. I guess I'm mixed up. Here in California, there's an initiative starting up that was formed with an expectation of this massive wave of evictions. So that was a takeaway there. And I'm wondering, Stacy, if there are other things that you think you'll add to the survey going forward that you already know might be pitched for the October survey.
Yeah, so I would love input or ideas. One thing we want to ask about is about the election if folks did vote. So we're thinking about a series of questions around that, as well as policy landscape going forward, especially as sort of we watch what does or doesn't happen with PEBT and how folks are able to access that. We hear quite a bit from households about PEBT, so keeping an eye on that. And then I guess reflecting on your earlier question, Ellen, I am surprised at the number of folks who have reported not having yet received the economic impact payment. And so thinking about how else we can dig into that a little bit to provide sort of these last few weeks before the November 21st deadline to get that to as many households as possible.
No, that's great. No, thank you so much, Stacy. And I know we're near time. I want to make sure that Nomi is able to give us our instructions and what will be going forth, because there will be the recording available and the slides. But thank you so much for the ongoing survey and for your graciousness in sharing this with us. I know we always get this little peek at it before any other eyes really get a chance to look at it. And again, thank you so much. I'm going to turn it now over to Nomi, though.
Thank you.
Thank you once again to everybody for joining us and to Stacy for such a great presentation. I'm going to stay on a little bit to just export the Q&A and the chat box results, because I know there were a few questions that we didn't get to. But once again, I want to thank everybody for your time, and we'll be sending a follow-up email with the recording and the slide deck. And once again, feel free to reach out to Stacy, to Ellen Vollinger, or myself, Nomi Small, if you have any additional questions. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.